Hello and welcome to today's European SharePoint Office 365 and Azure Community webinar. My name is Shane and I'm delighted to be joined by Sergey Sergeyev, MVP Mastak Belarus, who will be talking to you today about PnPJS, your new SharePoint and Office 365 development friend. Remember to join in the conversation about today's webinar on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @EuropeanSP and our hashtag is ESPC19. Don't forget to check out the Resource Center. This is packed with the latest blogs, ebooks, webinars, and how-to videos. Simply visit SharePointEurope.com and click the content link at the top. After the webinar, we will have a questions and answers session. Type any questions you have for Sergey in the question window. Questions will be selected and answered at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and added to the Resource Center, where you will be notified by email when it is available. And now I'm going to pass you over to our webinar presenter, Sergey Sergeyev. Hello, Sergey.
Hello, Shane. Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to PnPJS session. So I'm starting my presentation. Okay, now you should see it, right?
Yeah, we see your screen, Sergey. Take it away.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, my name is Sergey Sergeyev, and sometimes people confuse my first name and last name, and they ask me, hey, what is your last name? What is your first name? And I usually answer, please use any, because you see they're almost identical. So a few more words about me. I live in Belarus. I've been working with SharePoint for many years. I'm Microsoft MVP in Office development category. And currently I run my own small development and consultancy company called Mastak. You can also see my online identities for connections, questions, contacts, or anything else. And that's our today's small journey for the nearest hour. And at the very beginning, we will dive into the history a bit in order to refresh data access methods available in SharePoint. Then we'll think about why REST API today is a recommended way to access SharePoint data from client-side JavaScript, in other words, from browser. Next, welcome PnPJS. We will learn what is PnPJS, its structure, features, and we have our demo, of course. Actually, you see, I call it demo pack because we have a lot of demos, and demos are essential part of today's presentation. Then we are talking about some PnPJS advanced features. And finally, the last demo. This time it will be, I would say, more or less real-life application. That's an Outlook add-in, which talks to SharePoint via PnPJS. And we are good to go. So let's get started. Now let's jump into time travel machine and go way back into 2007 year. And probably you remember that in this year, the only way to interact with SharePoint was server-side object model and web services. However, things were changed in 2013 with introduction of SharePoint Online and REST API. And from this year until now, until 2019 and SharePoint 2019, REST API becomes more and more popular, and today it's recommended way of accessing SharePoint data from client side, from browser JavaScript. You see the font size, I use bigger font size for REST API in 2019 year, which basically means that REST API today is a very popular way to access SharePoint data. And the question is, why REST API? Why it is so popular? Why it's recommended way? And there are, of course, a number of reasons. First of all, REST API is not something unique to SharePoint. No, that's REST API. That's a commonly used standard across a lot of applications. A lot of apps use REST API, and you know that SharePoint is an enterprise-wide platform with its own API, and it's essential for SharePoint to support REST API, because REST API, that's the present and that's the nearest future. The nearest future because there are some other things like, for example, GraphQL and some other stuff. Additionally, REST API is a method to interact with the resource in a known way. Unlike web services in the past, REST API has predictable URI structure. For example, if you work under, let's say, API/web resource, then you can make sure that you work with web object. You can understand what is happening just by looking at URL. And finally, probably the most important feature of REST API is platform independency. You do not depend on any library, on any platform, on any programming language. You can simply utilize pure HTTP protocol in order to interact with REST API. So you see, there are some really good features of REST API. However, of course, there are some gotchas, and especially if you are developer, then you are the first person who meets some issues with REST API. Let's start with documentation things. Of course, any REST API should be very well documented. And unfortunately, that's not the case for SharePoint, in my opinion, because documentation for SharePoint is scattered across different sources, different pages, and different sites sometimes. Ideally, we would like to see something similar to MS Graph API documentation, where we have a website with all methods, parameters, return values, etc., etc. However, we expect that in future situation will be improved in this area. What else? Of course, inconvenient string manipulations. With REST API, you have to build valid URLs, and you have to build a lot of URLs. And in big projects, you will end up with string concatenations, different string, builders, helper functions, and some other stuff. In the end, it doesn't look good, and very often it leads to our next issue, to typo errors. And code itself becomes a lot more error-prone and less maintainable. That's actually that's a big issue. Additionally, code readability also suffers because of all the reasons I mentioned before. So from one side, REST API is present and in the future. From the other side, you see that consuming REST API has its gotchas, and PnPJS is a library which helps us to overcome these pitfalls. So welcome PnPJS. Now let's take a closer look at PnPJS. What is PnPJS, features, etc. Now imagine that this circle in the middle of the screen is our PnPJS core. And let's explore features of PnPJS. First of all is, of course, type checking and IntelliSense. That's a great thing. A lot of JavaScript libraries do not have such feature, but fortunately, PnPJS is written in TypeScript. That's why if you use it in TypeScript projects, and I guess you use TypeScript projects, you automatically receive type checking and IntelliSense. Sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes you don't even need documentation, because you can use in your Visual Studio Code. You can see IntelliSense, you can see documentation for methods, its parameters, return values, which is really, really helpful. Another essential feature of PnPJS is fluent interface. It means that almost all methods are chainable. You can write method name, then press dot, add another method call in the same chain, and so on. And this chain of methods or properties, it reflects SharePoint REST API URL structure, making it very easy to understand real URL used in your HTTP request. And additionally, of course, there are some advanced features like bytecaching, caching, parsers. We're going to see this in action in our demos. What else? Of course, PnPJS provides us with an interface to SharePoint REST API. It provides us with a fluent interface. And SharePoint REST API, that's an essential part of PnPJS. However, additionally, PnPJS provides us with an interface to MS Graph API. And this picture approximately illustrates how PnPJS looks today. You see that SharePoint REST API and the MS Graph cycles, they're not fully inside PnPJS, right? And this is, I made this intentional because not full API is covered today. However, in future, we expect that the code base of PnPJS will grow and even more APIs will be covered. And in perfect future, in I call it ideal future, we are expecting something like this one, when all and full MS Graph and SharePoint REST API will be covered inside PnPJS. I don't know exact date, but I hope that someday we will see this perfect and ideal future. Okay, some fresh news regarding PnPJS vNext. Currently, PnPJS version 2 is under development, and today I would say that it's in early beta or maybe even alpha. You see that you see some highlights. Library size will be improved. You will be able to bundle your solution using smaller chunks than it was before. Fluent syntax will be improved and simplified a bit. A lot of work still needs to be done around documentation and unit test coverage. And additional note regarding IE11 support. If you need IE11, then you should install polyfills. However, for now, I'm not sure if this polyfill will cover IE11 fully, but we'll see in the future. Just be aware that probably IE11 support will be limited in PnPJS 2. Okay, to give you even more good picture of how PnPJS can improve your code, take a look at this guy. This how your code might look like if you use a lot of string concatenation, if code readability suffers, if your code smells, etc., etc. It doesn't look good at all. However, with PnPJS, this is how your code might look like. You see the difference, right? Okay, let's go further. When it comes to SharePoint versions, then of course SharePoint Online is fully supported. SharePoint on-premises is also supported. However, please keep in mind that under the hood, PnPJS doesn't distinguish SharePoint versions, which basically means that some methods which are available in SharePoint Online might not be available in SharePoint on-premises. So just keep that in mind. Cool. Now, so which APIs have coverage inside PnPJS? When it comes to SharePoint API coverage, you will see that SharePoint REST API is pretty good covered. At the picture, you see only high-level elements of API. However, it also goes deeper, which is not visible here. One interesting moment is taxonomy. Earlier, I said that PnPJS gives us a convenient interface to REST API, to SharePoint REST API. However, today we do not have REST API for taxonomy. So how it is possible that PnPJS has taxonomy support? The answer is that instead of REST API, PnPJS uses client.svc SharePoint service and sends the same XML formatted data as JSON does it. So in other words, PnPJS pretends to be JSON to provide you with convenient taxonomy API access. In my opinion, it's something in between hack and normal solution. However, it works good and you can use it. And one additional side note that on the SharePoint user voice, there is an entry for REST API for taxonomy, and currently this entry is in development state, which means that in future we expect that taxonomy REST API will be implemented. And of course, it will be added in PnPJS. For a mass graph, you see that, again, there are a lot of objects here. However, the thing is that the amount of methods for objects is not as good as we wish to. That is why if you have a heavy graph requirement in your project, then please see what is available in a mass graph area in PnPJS and check if it's okay for your project to use PnPJS, or maybe you should use just pure HTTP request or maybe some other libraries. Okay, so we are approaching our demo pack. Do you have any questions so far? Shane, can you please check if there are any questions from attendees?
Yeah, sure. There's nothing so far, Sergey, so that's a good sign. Okay,
thank you. A few notes regarding demos. Let me actually show this slide. Yeah. In my demos, I concentrate on use cases and usage scenarios. And in my opinion, I don't see a lot of value to show how to create an item with PnPJS or how to add a list, add a field, because you will find documentation online and samples online. Actually, you can use VS Code with IntelliSense, which is pretty self-explanatory. And in my opinion, the usage scenarios and usage cases is something more interesting and more useful. So now I'm going to go to my virtual machine and I'm going to run the first demo. Let's open VS Code and let me actually run it. Cool. So this demo is pretty simple. If you want to use PnPJS in your project, in any project, then you should follow 3 simple steps. The first step, it is called install dependencies. So if you go to, so you see this is SharePoint Framework solution, and let me quickly show you. Oops. This is my client list web part, and it does nothing but shows you a list of clients. And my clients come from live SharePoint website from this clients list. So nothing special, just for demonstration purposes. However, the first step, as I said, the first step is install dependencies. If we go to package.json, you will see that there are a few PnP dependencies. PnPJS uses namespace pattern to store to distribute packages. That is why you should install a few of them. In my case, 4 of them. And this is it. At this stage, we've done our install dependency step. So basically, you should just type in npm install pnp/common, etc., and save under dependencies node in package.json, which will be handled by npm automatically. The next step after installation is configuration. If we open client list web part, then here you see that you should call a special method setup, and you should initialize a property called SPFX context with your web parts context. And SP is a variable I imported from PnP/SP package. So here again, nothing special, but this step is required in order to configure PnPJS library in SPFX solution correctly. And the final step, so we've completed installation, configuration, and the final step is just use it. If you go to our client list, then you see that here in my component mount, in my React component, I have PnPJS code, sp.web.lists, so I get a list by title and display all items using Office UI React details list. And as I said before, you have this nice small documentation for every method from VS Code, which is very convenient. And this is our web part. However, one important thing here, probably you have noticed it that I use local workbench. However, the data comes from real SharePoint. So if I open network and refresh the page, then you will see that these values, so my items, comes from some magic localhost/API/web. And actually, this is a small trick I use in this example, which allows you to use local workbench for development with PnPJS against live SharePoint server. To do that, you should install one additional dependency called SP-REST proxy. And you should also create a new file called proxy.js, which describes your proxy configuration and runs a proxy. And the most important thing here is config path. That's a path to my configuration file. So if I open this file, private.json, this file contains information about my site URL and authentication strategy I use. That's admin-only authentication, and my client ID and encrypted client secret. And in package, you see I have 2 commands running simultaneously: npm run proxy, which starts the proxy, and gulp serve. So doing that way, I am able to use localhost, which works faster than hosted workbench, to use local workbench, sorry, for development with PnPJS and SPFX against live SharePoint server. Cool. So this is it for this demo. Let me close this one and go to the next one. Next one will be again SharePoint framework web part with a MS graph. Let's run code again, and let's run serve again. So you remember that we should implement 3 simple steps. Install dependencies. I will skip that because that's pretty simple step. Now configuration part for MS graph. So here I have PnP graph web part, and configuration looks exactly the same. So there is a setup method This time I imported setup from pnp/common. That's another way to do setup in PnPJS. So I initialized SPFX context, and basically this is it. I've completed my configuration part. And if we open the web part itself, and let's go to hosted workbench. So this time MS Graph doesn't work with local workbench. And if I add my PnP Graph web part, then I will see all my Azure ID groups using, again, OFCI fabric list. And if we go and see the code, the actual code behind it, then you will see that in this time I use a graph variable from pnp/graph package, and I use again chainable fluent syntax to show all my Azure ID groups and display them in details list. It looks very similar. However, there is one additional step required to make this solution work. If we go to config folder, to package solution.json, then here you see that I've provided Web API permission requests, and I specified additional scope for Microsoft Graph Resource group read all. And this step is extremely important and extremely required because under the hood, PnPJS uses some out-of-the-box SharePoint framework features in order to talk to MS Graph. And that is the reason why you should provide all required permissions using Web API permission requests to make it work. So here I provided group read all. You should provide any other permissions which are needed for your specific scenario. You should package your solution. You should upload your solution into tenant app catalog. Then go to new SharePoint administration. This one. Then go to API management, and you should approve any pending permission request here. So we see that I have approved group read all. That is why I'm able to use and to see groups from my tenant here. Okay, that's it for SPFX with the MS Graph and PnPJS. Let me quickly close this one and go to the next demo. This time we are going to see something different than SPFX. This time it will be a separate standalone web application. And let me run it as well. In case if you want to build standalone web app using PnPJS, so in that case, your configuration step will be a lot more complicated because you should implement all authentication things on your own. So basically, again, I skip installation part, and let's see it in action in just a few seconds. Okay, so basically that's just a very simple application which shows info about me, SharePoint site info, and again Azure ID groups. It uses both SharePoint and MS Graph endpoints. Here I have a few configuration things. First of all, that's a React single page application. And for authentication, I use adult.js library. That is why before using adult.js, you should create a new app registration in your Azure AD. You should provide adult config file with your application ID, like I did here. Additionally, I implemented something called high order component in React terms called auth. I'm not going to dig into all adult.js internals, and I only want to show you this else block. So you see in this else block, my user is considered to be authenticated. which means that it's a good place to configure our PnPJS library. So this time you see again very familiar syntax, setup method. However, this time I use a new property called FetchClientFactory. FetchClientFactory, that's a method which returns an instance of a class which implements method fetch. Method fetch sends our HTTP request to SharePoint or to a mass graph, it doesn't matter. And before sending this request, we can modify headers somehow. And that's a good place to implement authentication and to attach Beera access token to our ongoing HTTP request. That's something I did here in this fetch method. So first of all, I use some API from Adult.js library to get token here, and then I attach this token to private variable with the same name token. This variable comes from a base class Beera token fetch client. This class is out of the box class from PnPJS, and this class simply attaches Beera token, so this token I specified here, to your ongoing HTTP request. So basically in this line, my request goes live to SharePoint or to a mass graph. So if we go back to our auth React component, then you see that both graph and SP variables have FetchClientFactory initialized. And that's a very important step here, because without authentication, nothing will work for you, right? And finally, this so we've done with configuration here. And finally, if we go to our containers, then you see these three components groups, MyInfo and SharePoint Info, which correspond to these three tabs. And additionally, if we open our network tab and let's go here, for example, and let's open our headers. So you see this authorization header and our Beera access token, which was attached automatically by this PnP fetch client. And we can open also, let's say, MyInfo, and in MyInfo the code is also, I think it is familiar for you. That's the graph object. Then I use chainable syntax graph.me.get user, and then I simply initialize the state, component state with user object, and the same for SharePoint and for Azure ID groups. Cool. I think this is it for standalone single page application with PnPJS and Adult.js. Sorry, a lot of JS today. And let me go to our final demo in this pack. And this demo will be again one more JS about Node.js. So let me run code and let me run. So as I said, PnPJS is the JavaScript library, and Node.js is something where you can run JavaScript, and it's pretty obvious that, of course, you can run PnPJS inside Node.js. Yeah, I think it's correct. And there are different ways to do that. The easiest one is using some built-in PnPJS functionality, and this part is commented here. So again, you should configure PnPJS instance with custom FetchClientFactory. You know what is FetchClientFactory from the previous demo. This time I use built-in SP fetch client. you see that I imported this SPFetch client from PnP/Node.js package. And this fetch client uses SharePoint Online add-in-only authentication in order to generate a token, access token, and attach this token to ongoing HTTP request. That is why you should register your SharePoint add-in and provide client ID and client secret here. If you want to use, let's say, username and password authentication, or if you want to support SharePoint on premises, then you can use another technique. You can use PnPAuth library. That's a library created by me and Andrew Koltikov. And this library has only one method called bootstrap. And in bootstrap, you should pass a sp variable and a path to your configuration file. And this file contains my site URL and again client ID and encrypted client secret. So that's another way on how to configure PnPJS in Node.js environment. Let's try to run it, and we should see information about my PnPJS website. So yeah, like this one. Cool. Let me close these windows and go back to my presentation. Yep. Okay. I want to recommend you some really nice tool for SharePoint developer in general and for PnPJS things as well. That's a Google Chrome add-in called SP Editor. SP Editor has a lot of cool features for SharePoint, and additionally, it has built-in PnPJS console where you can write and run PnPJS queries. PnPJS console uses the same editor as Visual Studio Code with IntelliSense, with error highlighting and all other cool stuff, like the same way as VS Code has it. So if you don't know about that extension, try it, and I'm sure you will like it. And now it's time to talk about some advanced features and utilities from PnPJS. First of all, let me talk about batching. That's a very useful feature in case if you want to combine many requests together in order to reduce server load. In general, batching is totally REST API feature, which is available in SharePoint Online and SharePoint on premises starting from 2016, I guess. The URL structure and data setup for request batching is, I would say, is complicated. However, PnPJS solves this problem and gives us a nice interface to use batching. Caching is also a technique which helps you to reduce performance issues and increase your up speed. If you have some rarely changing data, you can use caching in order to get data from cache instead of SharePoint. What else? Business objects. With business objects, you can extend default PnPJS classes with your own properties or with your own logic. That might be useful in middle-sized and big projects, and probably that not so useful in smaller projects. Response parser, that's additional great feature for mid to big applications. You can transform responses from SharePoint to your custom objects. We will see how it works, how all these features work in action in the next demo. I covered Node.js, and also I covered library configuration a bit. Actually, PnPJS has a lot more different configuration options, and I demonstrated some of them in my previous demo pack. Okay, and we're good to start our final demo. As said, that's a real-life application. That's an Outlook add-in built with PnPJS. So let's go ahead and see it in action. Let me start it. Let's start code and the serve. Okay, by this time we know how to install dependencies. Also, this project is based completely on a standalone web app demo I showed in the demo pack. That is why you see the same high order component called auth. And here again, I use PnPFetch client. So I'm not going to explain these things. However, instead, let me show you how it works in action. And for that purpose, I'm going to open a new browser session with my separate account and open Outlook and PnPJS website. Okay, at PnPJS website, I have MD Markdown templates list. And this list contains a few Markdown templates with title and template body itself. And here at my mail, I can click new to create a new message. And at the right bottom corner, you see this, that's a custom button. If I click here, then I will be automatically signed in, and I will see all my templates from PnPJS website. And I can select some template and insert it into the message body. I can even insert something more sophisticated like this one, or even some images, etc. So it all works fine here. Additionally, I have an option to do and to see the same experience in desktop version, thankfully to Office add-ins experience. So if I click new email, I can see again this button. And if I click insert template, okay, it asks me for a password. Sorry, just a sec. Let me copy my password and sign in. And let's wait for a while. Okay, and you see the same experience. I can select my styled README and insert into the message body. So this is it, how it works from end user perspective. Now let's go ahead and see how it looks from developer perspective. Here I have a document React component, documents. And this is the component which displays all my markdown elements in Office UI Fabric list. And take a look at these lines. Basically, these lines do all the job. First of all, this syntax is a bit unfamiliar for you probably. Speededweb.as templates web. So this templates web, that's an instance of a custom class. That's actually in terms in PnPJS terms, that's a custom business object. And a custom business object in PnPJS is nothing but a class which extends built-in PnPJS class. So in my case, I extended web, and custom business object can add methods, properties to base classes. So in my case, I added a new method called templates list. This method returns an instance of templates list. However, before returning the list, it also checks that the list exists. Additionally, here I use batching in order to populate a list with some default templates. So here you can see how to create a batch in PnPJS. The syntax is very simple. You should call speed.createBatch method. Now every method which need to be batched, you should put into the batch using special method called inBatch. So you see here I use it 5 times. And what is most important, that that the actual HTTP request is executed here at this line, and only one request will go live, and all my five items will be created in one go. So this is how batching helps you to eliminate a lot of unwanted requests. So 5 requests, that's not maybe a good case, but in real life application, of course, you will batch like 100 or maybe a few hundreds of requests in one single request. Okay, let's take a closer look at my templates list, because as you guessed, templates list is also an instance of a custom business object. This list adds a new method called getTemplates, and this method returns all my markdown templates. However, you see that this method implements caching in order to reduce server load, server calls. It caches data for 10 minutes, and it returns data from either session or local storage instead of live SharePoint, and it refreshes the cache every 10 minutes. So that's a caching technique you can use from PnPJS. That's a built-in feature. And finally, at the very end, you see that my data, my actual SharePoint items, they are transformed using custom template item parser. So if I go here into my template item parser, then you will see that that's additional, I would say, advanced feature of PnPJS, which dynamically transforms all incoming data into something different. For example, in my case, I don't want to type d.title, d.template, etc. Also, my view model property names might be different than field names in SharePoint. That is why you can use this technique in order to transform SharePoint data view into your model data view. For example, if we open it here, oh, sorry, I can't because of caching. Okay, never mind. And so let's go back to our documents React component, and you see that from consumer perspective, it looks very clean. I have only like 5 or 6 lines of code, and all the domain business logic was encapsulated inside custom PnPJS business objects. In my case, it was templates web and templates list. That way we can simplify our code and we can put our custom business logic into separate classes. Okay, what else I want to say here? I think that's it for this demo. And let me start my presentation again. Okay, do you have any questions so far?
No, Sergey, we're good on the questions, so please continue.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and actually we are almost finished. So these are resources I use in my presentation, in my demos. What is the most important? Probably, of course, PnPJS, GitHub account, PnPJS documentation. At the very bottom, you will find a link to GitHub repository with all sources from all my today's demo as well as presentation. Also the link to SharePoint editor, SP editor, Chrome extension. Yeah, so these are resources. So then, thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Shane, for this opportunity to show this demo.
Thank you, Sergey, for a great presentation. And we have no questions in, Sergey, so I think that's a sign that you have presented your information really well. So there's no confusion out there, which is great to see.
Thank you.
Great. On behalf of the ESPC community, Sergey, thank you for taking the time today to complete this webinar. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Shane.
Thank you, Sergey. Okay, so just to wrap up, everybody, that is the end of today's webinar. Please see sharepointeurope.com for further details on all upcoming webinars, or visit the Resource Center for all previous episodes. Thank you again to Sergey Sergeyev for the webinar today. Take care and goodbye.
Bye.